The morning after my cousin's wedding, I opened my banking app the way I always do, half asleep, one eye closed, expecting nothing. I do it out of habit, the same way I check the weather before getting out of bed. But that Saturday, the number on the screen made me sit straight up so fast I knocked my water glass off the nightstand. $43,200. Gone. My wedding fund. 5 years of double shifts, skipped vacations, brown bag lunches at my desk. The money I had been quietly, carefully building since I was 26 years old, dreaming about a small ceremony on a lake somewhere in Vermont. All of it. Gone from my savings account overnight, while I slept 2 doors down the hallway in my grandmother's house, surrounded by family. I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch in my grandmother's sewing room and stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I refreshed it 3 times. The number didn't change. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse, and I have spent the better part of a decade learning how to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart. I have held the hands of strangers during the worst moments of their lives. I have delivered news that broke people in half, and then kept moving because the next patient needed me. I know what it means to hold yourself together through sheer force of will. But sitting in that sewing room, surrounded by my grandmother's fabric scraps and the faint smell of her lavender hand cream, I felt something inside me crack open. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. My brother Derek is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the golden one, tall, charming, the kind of person who could talk his way into or out of anything. My parents adored him, in that unexamined way. Some parents adore their firstborn, the way that makes them overlook things they shouldn't. He borrowed money from our parents constantly and paid it back maybe 30% of the time. He had a talent for making people feel like helping him was their idea. He'd look you in the eye with this warm, open expression, and you'd find yourself handing over your debit card before you even understood how the conversation got there. I watched him do it my whole childhood, to our parents, to his friends. Once, when I was 14, he borrowed $40 from me for gas and never mentioned it again. When I brought it up 2 weeks later, he looked genuinely confused, like the memory had simply been erased, and said, "Claire, I would never do that. You must be thinking of someone else." He said it so smoothly that for one terrible second I doubted myself. That was Derek. By the time I became an adult, I had built very clear walls. I loved my brother, the way you love someone who is woven into your earliest memories, but I did not lend him money. I did not share my financial information with him. I did not let him know specifics about my accounts or my savings, because I had learned, slowly and painfully, that information in Derek's hands had a way of becoming useful to Derek. He knew I was saving for a wedding. I'd mentioned it once at a family dinner 2 years ago, the way you mention a dream, not a plan someday I want to do something small on a lake somewhere. That was all he knew, or so I thought. Our cousin Rachel's wedding had been the family event of the decade. She'd gotten married at our grandmother Nana Ruth's property, this beautiful old farmhouse in upstate New York that had been in the family for 3 generations. The whole family had descended on it for the long weekend. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, and Derek, who had driven up from Philadelphia with his girlfriend Simone, and a bottle of expensive bourbon that I later found out he'd put on a credit card he wasn't paying. It had been a genuinely lovely weekend. That's the part that still gets me when I think about it. I laughed until my stomach hurt at the rehearsal dinner. I danced with Nana Ruth at the reception, her small hands in mine, her eyes bright. I went to bed that Friday night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, like my family was just a family, ordinary and warm and mine. I should have known that feeling was a warning. Here's what I pieced together later, after everything. Derek had been in the financial hole for months. A business venture he'd poured money into had collapsed in the spring, and he'd been scrambling to cover losses he was too proud to admit to anyone. He'd tried 3 different people before the wedding weekend. 2 of them had said no. One of them, our cousin Marcus, had actually called me after everything came out and told me that Derek had approached him at the rehearsal dinner with some vague story about a bridge loan, and Marcus had laughed it off, thinking Derek was joking. Derek was not joking. At some point during that weekend, investigators later narrowed it to sometime between midnight and 2 in the morning on Friday night. While the rest of us were asleep, Derek went through Nana Ruth's old writing desk in the living room. I had made a mistake. A stupid, careless mistake that I will never stop being angry at myself for, even though I know the fault was not ultimately mine. 3 months before the wedding weekend, I had helped Nana Ruth set up online bill pay for her utilities. She was 81 and her hands shook when she tried to use the laptop trackpad, so I'd sat with her for a whole afternoon, walking her through it, setting up her passwords, writing things down in her careful cursive in the small notebook she kept in the desk drawer for exactly that kind of thing. What I hadn't thought about, what I genuinely hadn't considered, was that I had also logged into my own accounts that afternoon to show her how online banking worked in comparison. I'd used her laptop, and I'd been sloppy about logging out. Derek found the notebook in the desk. He also found my credentials still cached in the browser. He didn't take it all at once. That was what made it so hard to catch in real time. He moved the money in 3 transfers over 6 hours, $18,000, then $14,000, then $11,200, routing it through a payment platform I barely used, to an account I had never seen before. By the time I woke up and looked at my phone, the transfers had already processed. I sat in that sewing room for a long time. I want to be honest about what those first few minutes felt like, because I think people imagine that in moments like that you immediately know what to do. You don't. I sat there and I felt something very close to shame before I felt anything else, which I now understand is one of the cruelest things about being robbed by someone you love. Your first instinct is to wonder what you did wrong. Your second instinct is to protect them, even as you're staring at the proof of what they took. My third instinct was to find my brother. Derek was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He was making coffee, still in his pajamas, relaxed and unhurried in the way of someone with no particular worries. Simone was at the kitchen table reading something on her phone. Nana Ruth was somewhere upstairs getting dressed. 2 of my aunts were out on the porch with mugs of tea. The house was doing what it does the morning after a celebration, settling back into itself, comfortable and slow. Derek looked up when I came in and smiled. "Morning. Coffee's almost ready." I put my phone on the counter in front of him, with the banking screen facing up. "Can you tell me where this money went?" I asked. I kept my voice very quiet. I had learned from years of nursing that a quiet voice in a tense situation is more frightening than a raised one. He looked down at the screen. Something moved across his face just for a second, too fast to name, and then it was gone, replaced by a look of careful confusion. "What is this?" "That's my savings account," I said. $43,000 is missing. Transferred out last night in 3 transactions. I paused. From Nana Ruth's laptop. He picked up the phone and looked at it more closely, and I watched him decide what to do. I could actually see him running through his options the way you can see a person decide which door to open. He settled on concern. "Claire, this is terrible. Did you call the bank? It could be fraud. Have you reported it?" "I'm going to," I said. "I wanted to talk to you first." He handed my phone back. "Why would you talk to me first? I don't know anything about this." Simone had looked up from her phone. She was watching us with the careful attention of someone who understood that what was happening was not a casual conversation. "The transfers went through a payment platform," I said. "The IP address logged for the transactions came from this house. And your name is listed as the account holder on the receiving end. I can see it in the transaction details." That last part was only partially true. I could see a partial account reference, not his full name. But I needed to see his face when I said it. He set his coffee mug down. "I think you're upset, and you're not thinking clearly. That's a serious accusation." "I haven't accused you of anything," I said. "I asked you to tell me where the money went." He looked at me for a long moment, and I have thought about this moment 100 times since he shrugged. An actual, physical shrug. Like I had asked him something mildly inconvenient. "You've always had more than the rest of us," he said. "You've never had a family to support, no real pressure. Some of us have been struggling, and you're sitting on $40,000 for a wedding that hasn't even been planned yet." He picked his coffee back up. "Think of it as a loan. I was going to tell you." The kitchen was completely silent. Simone made a small sound, something between a breath and a word that she swallowed before it came out. I stood there and I felt the room tilt slightly, the way it does when something you knew was true but hoped wasn't becomes undeniable. He was not panicked, he was not apologetic. He was annoyed. The way someone is annoyed when a situation they've already decided is resolved keeps being brought up. "You were going to tell me?" I repeated. "Yes. After I got back on my feet? A few months, maybe 6. It's not like you need it right now." I picked up my phone. "Okay," I said. He visibly relaxed. "Look, let's not make this a whole thing. It's the morning after Rachel's wedding. Nana Ruth doesn't need to deal with this. Let's just—" I said, "Okay, Derek," I told him. "I heard you." I went back upstairs. Here is what I want people to understand, because I think this is the part that gets missed in stories like mine. I did not go upstairs to cry. I did not go upstairs to fall apart. I went upstairs because I had work to do, and I needed to do it quietly, before he had time to think. I called my bank first. Fraud report, account frozen, investigation initiated. The representative I spoke to was calm and thorough, and told me that because the transfers had originated from what appeared to be my own cached login credentials on a device I had previously used, the fraud claim would be complex possible, but complex. She told me to also file a police report. I called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office and reported the theft. I gave them the transaction details, the IP logs I'd screenshotted, and Derek's name. The deputy I spoke to was straightforward. This would take time, but what I was describing was wire fraud and theft, and I should document everything. I texted my best friend Joanna, who had been through a custody dispute 2 years prior, and knew more about lawyers than anyone our age should. She sent me 3 names within 4 minutes. I called the first one, left a message. The second one answered. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with an attorney named Patricia from her home office on a Saturday morning, and by the end of that call, I understood exactly what my options were and what the realistic timeline looked like. Then I washed my face, put on the same cardigan I'd worn the day before, and went back downstairs for coffee. Derek was still in the kitchen, now eating toast, still wearing his pajamas. He looked up when I came in and gave me a careful, measured smile. The smile of someone who believes the situation has been handled. I smiled back. I poured myself coffee. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. Nana Ruth came down while I was standing at the counter. She was dressed for the day, in her neat way-pressed slacks, her silver hair pinned back, and she looked between us with the perceptive eyes of a woman who raised 4 children and knew when something was wrong, even when everyone was pretending otherwise. "You both are very quiet this morning," she said. "Just tired," Derek said. Nana Ruth looked at me. "I need to tell you something," I said to her gently. "When you have a few minutes, just the 2 of us." Derek's jaw tightened. I told Nana Ruth everything. I sat with her in the small sitting room off the front hallway, the one with the reading chair she's had since before my mother was born, and I walked her through what had happened step by step. I showed her the transaction records. I explained that Derek had used her laptop, which meant her home network was part of the investigation. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that the notebook in that desk was mine. The passwords I wrote down were mine. If he used my home to do this—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. That boy, not a boy, 45 years old, but I understood what she meant. What happened over the following 3 weeks was not dramatic in the way that people expect when they hear the word legal action. It was administrative. It was paperwork and phone calls and a second meeting with Patricia where we mapped out a civil claim alongside the criminal report. Derek hired an attorney of his own, which told me that despite his performance in the kitchen, he understood exactly how serious the situation was. The criminal investigation moved more quickly than I'd expected. The transaction records were clear. The IP address logs from Nana Ruth's router were clear. The payment platform records, subpoenaed by the sheriff's office, showed the receiving account belonged to Derek. He had not covered his tracks because, I think, he had genuinely believed I would handle it the same way I had handled the $40 when I was 14, with confusion, then doubt, then silence. He did not know who I had become in the years since then. The civil case settled before it went to court. Derek liquidated a retirement account to return the money. He was also charged criminally and pleaded down to a misdemeanor theft charge with restitution and 2 years of probation. His attorney argued for leniency given the family context. The judge was not particularly moved. I know some people feel that was too light. I understand that. There are moments when I feel it too when I think about those 3 transfers, about him standing in Nana Ruth's living room in the dark, finding the notebook, deciding to do it anyway. But I had my money back. I had the legal record. And I had the knowledge that Derek could no longer use the version of me he thought he knew, the one who would doubt herself, who would protect him from consequences, who would let things go to keep the peace. That version of me was gone. My Aunt Linda called me about 2 months after everything settled. She had been at the wedding, one of the aunts out on the porch that morning. She'd watched Derek and me in the kitchen more carefully than I'd realized. She told me she wasn't surprised. She told me she'd been waiting, in the way that the people who see things clearly have been waiting for something like this to happen for a very long time. "I want you to know," she said, "that most of us are on your side, even the ones who aren't saying it yet." I appreciated that. I also didn't need it the way I might have needed it once. Here is the thing about being betrayed by someone who should have protected you. It is not just about the money. The money was mine and I got it back, and in a purely practical sense, the story ends there. But what he took, really, was something harder to put back. He took the morning after my cousin's wedding, which had been one of the loveliest mornings I'd had in years. He took the feeling I'd gone to sleep with, that uncomplicated, unguarded warmth of being surrounded by family. He took it and replaced it with something else, something that I have had to very deliberately choose not to carry. I did not go back to the farmhouse for the holidays that year. I needed time, and Nana Ruth understood. We talked on the phone every Sunday, the same way we always had, and she always ended the call the same way. You are exactly who I always thought you were, Claire. Don't let anyone tell you different. I got engaged 7 months after everything happened. Not because of the money that was still earmarked, still sitting in a new account with considerably better security, but because life keeps moving, and I had stopped letting fear of disruption keep me from reaching for things I wanted. We're planning something small. A lake, yes. Vermont, as it turns out. Derek sent a card when he heard. No note inside, just his signature and Simone's. I looked at it for a while and then I put it in a drawer and went to look at venue photos with the person I love. I don't have a tidy piece of wisdom about family to offer you, because I've found that tidy wisdom about family is usually designed to make the person giving it feel better, rather than the person receiving it. What I have is this. The people who love you will not help themselves to you. They will not stand in the kitchen the morning after they've taken everything you worked for and shrug and tell you that you always had enough. Love does not do that. Entitlement does that. Need does that. Selfishness does that, the kind that has been enabled and excused and looked past for so many years that it no longer even bothers to feel ashamed of itself. You are allowed to name that clearly. You are allowed to call the bank and the sheriff and an attorney on a Saturday morning. You are allowed to tell the truth to your grandmother in her reading room, even when it's hard, even when some part of you still loves the person you're telling the truth about. You are allowed to protect what you built, without apology, without performing forgiveness you don't feel, without shrinking yourself to make space for someone else's refusal to be accountable. I sat in that sewing room for a long time before I went downstairs. I was scared and I was grief-stricken, and I doubted myself in those first few minutes in every way I've described. But I went downstairs. I asked the question. I listened to his answer. And then I went back upstairs and I got to work. If you're watching this and you recognize something in this story, if there's someone in your life who has been helping themselves to you and calling it love, I want you to hear this. Staying quiet is not the same as keeping the peace. Sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is the thing that finally ends it. Thank you for being here. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. I read all of them, and your words matter more than you know. And if you're not subscribed to Karma's Turn yet, now's a good time. I'll see you in the next one.